The time is now for the Dr. Bob Sports Podcast. I am Tanner. I am our head of analytics, and I am in my 8th year working alongside Bob to originate our NFL and college basketball bets. And today, as always, I'm joined by our digital media specialist, Grant. We've got a fun one today. A ton of offseason changes in the NFC North.
Yeah, I am pumped to talk about these teams. I mean, this will be the next in our series, diving deep into a division each week leading up to the season. And we'll touch on some fantasy advice, and we'll also share a future bet for later in the podcast.
Yeah, yep. So let's start with the Bears here, because they're the Hard Knocks team this preseason, which I'm pretty pumped to watch. And they play in the Hall of Fame game in less than a week. So we'll get to see those new kickoff rules very, very soon.
Yeah, those new kickoff rules are going to be pretty exciting to watch, but let's start with the Bears here. They're coming off of that 7-10 season. And remember, they began the season 0-4, and they were on a 14-game losing streak dating back to 2022, but they would finally start to find their identity. I mean, they went 7-6 to end the year, but there's some room for improvement for a team who blew 3 separate double-digit fourth-quarter leads, but now they have Caleb Williams, who could be an immediate threat. So looking at their 2024 win total, you can get it at 8.5 at -165 or 9 at +105. And I think the big question here is this the best supporting cast ever for a first overall pick?
I think it could be. I think it is. I mean, I looked back just in the modern NFL era, which I consider after that CBA in 2011. It certainly wasn't Cam Newton, whose Panthers only scored 17 touchdowns the year prior to him being drafted. And then you look at Andrew Luck. He came in with T.Y. Hilton and Reggie Wayne at receiver, pretty good there. But the offensive line, you'll remember, was terrible. They ranked 31st in pass blocking efficiency, Andrew Luck's rookie season. Now, Jameis Winston is probably the closest to what Caleb Williams is getting because he already had Mike Evans and Vincent Jackson at wide receiver, and then they hit on a couple of rookie starters on the offensive line in Donovan Smith and Ali Marpet.
Yeah, but then you look at the next two guys, and you have Jared Goff, who's throwing to Kenny Britt and Tavon Austin. And then you also famously have the Browns drafting Baker after they just went 0-16.
Yeah, and it really wasn't good for Joe Burrow either. His offensive line graded 27th in pass blocking by PFF his rookie year, and then Trevor Lawrence was throwing to Marvin Jones and Laviska Shenault as his top pass catchers, and it was a circus in Jacksonville during that Urban Meyer season. And then just looking at last year, I mean, Bryce Young's situation ended up being a train wreck with a short quarterback behind the worst interior offensive line in the league, throwing to a group of receivers that just could not separate.
Yeah, so let's look at Caleb's supporting cast because it feels like Ryan Poles is looking to give this offense every opportunity. I mean, the GM came over from Kansas City and he wants to build this unit into a juggernaut, which he signaled by drafting wide receiver Rome Odunze over a pass rusher on defense like Dallas Turner.
Yeah. And next to Odunze, they've still got DJ Moore, who ranked 13th in yards per route run last year. Tight end Cole Kmet comes back. He was 4th in EPA per target in 2023. And then they added Keenan Allen, who was 7th in success rate last year. So this receiving core is extremely dangerous for Caleb Williams.
Yeah, and looking at the offensive line, they're bringing back 4 starters as well.
Yeah, and then the 5th spot there at center, looks like it's up for grabs right now between 2 veterans that they added in Ryan Bates and Coleman Shelton. So those guys will battle it out in training camp. I think these tackles have a real chance to improve going into year 2 and year 3. So I think this is a league average offensive line.
All right, well, what do we think about the new play caller here, though?
I've got Shane Waldron as a replacement level offensive coordinator. I mean, he's not going to kill you in games like a Matt Canada was doing last year, but you're not going to win games because of Shane Waldron. So I mean, just overall looking at it, I think it's fair to say that Caleb is a top 3 quarterback prospect in the last 15 years, and he'll be behind the best supporting cast we've seen from a number 1 pick in the modern NFL era. So where you think this Bears offense ends up is kind of how you feel about where they are in this tier, along with Atlanta, Seattle, and Indianapolis. That's kind of a barometer for how you see this unit. I think they're the best of that group. I think that they have a better offense than the Falcons, Seahawks, and Colts. I'm pretty bullish on Caleb as a quarterback prospect heading into the NFL. So I'm pretty pumped about what we could see from this Bears offense.
Yeah, I mean, this is exciting times in Chicago. I mean, especially considering that the Bears defense was fifth in EPA per play in the back half of last season after trading for Montez Sweat.
Mm-hmm. Yep. That was partially, that EPA rank was partially due to takeaways, but they were also 10th in success rate. Pretty good there. And now they bring in Kevin Byard to a promising young secondary headlined by cornerback Jalen Johnson, who allowed a league low 0.38 yards per cover snap last year. And Byard was fine last season in Tennessee. He got traded to Philly. It wasn't one of his best seasons, but he's shown the ability in the past to be the best safety in the NFL like he was in 2021.
Yeah, I think Byard's a nice addition to the spine of this defense that already features TJ Edwards and Tremaine Edmonds.
Yeah, and having two solid coverage linebackers that can dominate the middle of this Matt Eberflus defense is particularly important in this division, because you look at the other teams, Lions with Jared Goff and offensive coordinator Ben Johnson targeted the middle of the field the second most last season, but they averaged just 4.6 yards per pass play in 2 games against the Bears. And then those linebackers and Byard are going to come into a big play during the Packers game as well, because only Lamar Jackson had a higher EPA per play on throws between the number than Jordan Love last season.
Yeah, I think the big question mark is the pass rush outside of Montez Sweat, though.
Mm-hmm. They really need to bring in another body, but this year's pass rushing market is mostly dried up. I mean, it feels like other years we see guys wait closer into training camp before they sign. I mean, it feels like Jadeveon Clowney always waits. He didn't this year. I mean, last August, the Bears, they brought in Yannick Ngakoue, but he ranked 53rd in pass rushing efficiency out of 55 qualifying edge rushers. He's one of the worst starters in the league. And Emmanuel Ogbah was one of the last guys left in the free agency market, but he just signed with Miami after that Shaq Barrett retirement. So the Bears are really going to be scraping the bottom of the barrel here. I mean, maybe they give Marcus Golden the look, but however you slice it, the pass rush outside of Montez Sweat is not going to be good.
All right, so assuming that they add nobody, where do you rank this defense?
So we said this Bears defense was 10th in success rate allowed with Montez Sweat in the second half of last season, but they were incredibly healthy. While other teams dealt with injuries in November and December, the Bears were basically at full strength. So with everyone else back healthy, I would say this is a league average defense. They play the third easiest schedule, while the other teams in this division play schedules tougher than average. So you've got a league average defense and offense a little bit better than average. This looks like a dead-on 9-8 team to me.
Yeah, I think Bears fans would be pretty happy with 9-8 in their first season with Caleb Williams. But let's move it over to the new kings of this division. We've got the Detroit Lions coming off of that 12-5 season. And remember, they came out flying. They started the year 8-2 and became a serious contender in the NFC. I mean, they won the NFC North for the first time in franchise history, and then they hosted a playoff game for the first time since 1993. And then they would go on to win a pair of playoff games, but would fall short to the 49ers and the NFC Championship. So 2024, we're looking at a win total set at 10.5.
Yeah, and the big surprise this offseason was they were able to retain offensive coordinator Ben Johnson. So they keep the coaching staff intact, and the strength of this team remains with the offensive line that graded second in run blocking by PFF last season.
Yeah, I mean, you have Dave Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs in their first season with the Lions combined for 1,960 yards, 4.9 yards per carry, and 23 touchdowns on the ground.
Yeah, and I think those two should combine for around 200 yards rushing again in 2024. Now, the offensive line wasn't quite as good pass blocking last year. They still ranked 13th in pass blocking efficiency, but they just got better on that front, swapping guard Jonah Jackson for Kevin Zeitler, who they brought in. Zeitler was one of 6 qualifying guards to concede fewer than 20 pressures all season. And with the turnover on that Dallas and Philly offensive lines this offseason, I have the Lions with clearly the best offensive line in the NFL heading into 2024.
All right, well, the Lions did not bring back wide receiver Josh Reynolds, who ran twice as many routes as Jameson Williams last season.
That signals to me they're expecting a big third-year leap from the former first-round pick after injuries and suspensions have derailed his career to this point. And going into last season, we thought this receiving group was a little bit light. And then Sam Laporta, rookie second-rounder, came out and ranked third in EPA per target among tight ends. But we all know this offense revolves around Amon-Ra St. Brown, who was fourth in success rate last season.
Yeah, and it feels like the only way you can really slow down Jared Goff in this offense is consistent interior pressure or the weather.
And, I mean, you bring in Zeitler to shore up that pass blocking on the interior, and the weather's really not going to be a big deal this year. You look at it, they only play 3 outdoor games, and one of which is in Santa Clara, which will likely be good weather. So this offense is going to be great again. I can see why Ben Johnson came back for another year, and I would be surprised if he did not take a head coaching job heading into the 2025 season.
All right, well, let's switch it over to the defense, and let's start with the positive. They were 4th in EPA per rush allowed last season.
Yeah, but the pass defense was much more tumultuous. The Lions started the season playing a ton of quarters because they just didn't have good cornerbacks on the roster. So, try to protect those guys, play a lot of SOP zones, but that's not how defensive coordinator Aaron Glenn wants to play. He wants to be aggressive. And they switched halfway through the season to a more blitzing man approach. Now, the problem is the Lions were last in the league in EPA per dropback when they ran man coverage. I mean, you look at it, Detroit's outside cornerbacks surrendered a whopping 9.6 yards per target in 2023.
Yeah, but the Lions did use their first and second round picks on cornerbacks, and they brought in Carlton Davis.
And there's a chance this goes really well if those guys hit because they have a solid front. Now, you look at it, Aiden Hutchinson was the 5th player since 2006 to have at least 100 pressures last season. He's still young. They can still lean on him to take a lot of snaps. They bring in Marcus Davenport to play edge opposite Hutchinson. Now, he was out for much of last season, but he had a 13% pressure rate in 2022 in New Orleans. And they bring in DJ Reader, who graded 6th in run defense among interior defenders last year, along with his 34 pressures, and he'll be a solid piece next to Aleem McNeil. So I'm looking at it. If either Terrion Arnold or Enos Rakestraw hit, this Lions defense has a chance to finish better than average for the first time since 2018.
Yeah, I mean, if this defense hits, I mean, this team is going to be scary good. But let's switch it over to the Green Bay Packers, who are coming off of that 9-8 season. I mean, this was their first year since 2004 without Rodgers on the roster, and the team got off to a brutal 3-6 start. But this offense began to click. They won 6 of 8 to end the year, and they snuck into the playoffs. And remember, they spanked the 2-seed Cowboys, but then they would go on to fall short to the 49ers. But there is a lot of excitement around this young team who has a win total set at 9.5.
Yeah, and then going into the playoffs last year, this offense was 12th in the betting markets, but the hype train has really taken off heading into year 2 of the Jordan Love era, and I think that's partially what you were referring to. Jordan Love averaged 1.13 EPA per play in the wild card round against the Cowboys, which was the most of any playoff quarterback in the last 2 decades. So with that being one of the last games we saw Love play, everyone is very, very excited about this Packers offense heading into 2024.
Yeah, recency bias is always huge, but let's look at their wide receivers. I mean, they had by far the youngest receiver corps in the NFL, and now they bring everybody back.
Yeah, and Christian Watson missed 8 games last year. So, with him finally at full health, I know they've been working on his hamstrings, a different program for him to try and stay on the field more than he has been to this point in his career. Then they got Jaden Reed, who was 5th in yards per route run in the slot. Dontavian Wicks averaged 2.7 yards per route run in the second half of last season. So another year with all these guys together, they could make a leap. But to sober ourselves against the hype train, let's compare this offense to another team right next to them in market in the Rams. Actually, the market has the Packers rated above the Rams right now. So offensive lines between those two teams about the same. Are we ready to say Jordan Love is a better quarterback than Matt Stafford? Are we ready to say Matt LaFleur is a better play caller than Sean McVay. I mean, is this group of receivers better than Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua? I mean, I'm open to the answer to all those questions being yes, but you basically need to believe all of those for this group to be clearly top 10 in 2024.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. I mean, it's pretty easy to get excited about this team based on how they finished last year. But when you start comparing them to other teams in the tier like the Rams or the Texans, I mean, you have to ask yourself the hard questions about which unit you really like more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now we can shift over to the defense, and there's a big change on this side of the ball as opposed to the offense, who's basically just running it back. They're shifting from the too high safety world of Joe Barry, former defensive coordinator, to hiring Jeff Hafley, who was the head coach at Boston College, who ran more single high safety looks than anyone in college football. So the Packers are going to lean in to this philosophy. That was the big reason they gave Xavier McKinney 4 years, $68 million. I mean, that's pretty much the only big deal we saw for a safety this offseason. You haven't even seen 4-time All-Pro Justin Simmons be signed yet, to give you a sense of where the safety market is at. And then, along with McKinney, they're going to be relying on guys in the secondary like Jair Alexander, who has alternated between being an All-Pro and battling injuries for each of the last 4 seasons. Now, he's a beast if healthy. And then opposite Jair, the Packers did not pick up the 5th-year option for former first-round pick Eric Stokes, and it looks like it's going to be a training camp battle between him and Carrington Valentine.
Yeah, and at linebacker, Green Bay released Devondre Campbell and drafted Edgerrin Cooper in the 2nd round.
That's going to be a downgrade, but they're still very strong on the defensive line. The Packers finished 7th in pressure rate last year with those edge rushers with Sean Gary, Preston Smith, and then last year's first-round pick, Lucas Van Ness, could make a leap here, and they got 2022 first-round pick Devontae Wyatt on the interior, who's been solid next to Kenny Clark, who they just re-signed after he finished 7th in pressures last year. So I'm going to start this defense around league average, but I see potential here if everything clicks under the new defensive coordinator.
Yeah, this is another exciting team to watch, but let's move it on to our last team. We've got the Minnesota Vikings coming off of that 7-10 season. And remember, also a horrible 0-3 start, but they started to string together some wins in the middle of the year until Kirk Cousins tore his Achilles week 8, and then the team lost 6-7 to end the year. I mean, this team is only 1 year removed from that 13-4 season, but now they've got a new rookie QB and a win total set at just 6.5.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, based on the talent Minnesota had coming into last year, the defense surprisingly finished in the top half of the NFL. And I think that was almost exclusively due to coordinator Brian Flores, who ranked 2nd in our scheme uniqueness indicator. The Vikings led the NFL in blitz rate and led the NFL in drop 8 into coverage rate. I mean, you typically do not see that level of aggressiveness and conservativeness paired together. Now, NFL offenses will be more ready for this unique scheme going into 2024, and they really didn't upgrade the talent on defense this offseason.
Yeah, I mean, they added 3 pass rushers to replace the 3 edge defenders that left in the offseason.
Yeah, they bring in Andrew Van Ginkel, Jonathan Grenard. They traded up to draft Dallas Turner to replace Danielle Hunter, DJ Wanham, Marcus Davenport. Now, from a talent level, that 3-for-3 swap to me is basically a wash, but I think the 3 new guys fit Brian Flores' scheme better because guys like Andrew Van Ginkel and Dallas Turner are more adept to dropping into coverage. And we know that Brian Flores likes to drop guys off of the defensive line so you don't know where the pass rush is coming from. So, I think the pass rush will be roughly similar in quality, but the coverage could improve with these new edges that they bring in.
Yeah, I think Dallas Turner could be really good, but what do you think about the back end of this defense?
Well, Shaquille Griffin, cornerback, they bring in. He'll likely be an upgrade on a Caleb Evans, but there's just still so many question marks in this secondary. I mean, safety Josh Metellus gives the Vikings versatility and run defense. He lined up as a nickelback most of last year, but he allowed a league high 1.98 yards per cover snap in the slot. So he was awful in coverage for them. And then another guy they brought in last year, Byron Murphy, was not great after signing from the Cardinals. And then Harrison Smith at safety considered retiring before deciding to come back for his age 35 season. I think at this point, they wish former first-round pick Lewis Seen would be in that starting role by now, but he just has not been able to get onto the field to this point in his career.
All right, well, let's shift it over to the offense. And it looks like Sam Darnold will be starting under center. I mean, after they just gave him $10 million.
Yeah. Yeah, and this offense rated 21st last year in market after Kirk got hurt. So they were ranked 21st with Nick Mullins starting because the supporting cast and play calling was so solid. And I don't think Nick Mullins is worse than Sam Darnold. I mean, Darnold had a rough start to his career with Adam Gase in New York, but he averaged 5.7 yards per pass play in 17 starts with the Panthers without elite play calling or without elite supporting cast. So I think it's reasonable to have this passing offense top 20 until they make the switch to rookie JJ McCarthy, because it's one of the best tackle tandems in the NFL. Christian Darrisaw, Brian O'Neill, they just gave Justin Jefferson a massive 4-year, $140 million deal, much deserved. Crazy. The concern is wide receiver Jordan Addison coming off a pretty solid rookie campaign, but he may face suspension after getting a DUI this summer.
Yeah, and another issue, Minnesota security blanket, TJ Hawkinson was 4th in yards per route run, but he tore his ACL and MCL in his right knee in late December.
Yeah, he's going to begin the year on the PUP list, but he's considered, quote, well ahead in his recovery per Kevin O'Connell. Now, guys that have multiple ligament tears in the knees usually aren't very good the season they come back, especially with this one being late in the season. So I'm not expecting much from TJ Hawkinson this year.
All right, so what number are you going to put on this team for a power rating?
I think the defense is going to be in that middle of the pack-ish range, fighting to be a league average defense, maybe there. I mean, last year they were above league average, but I think, there's probably going to be a little bit of a drop-off this year as teams get used to the Brian Flores scheme. The offense is going to be in that mediocre range with teams like the Buccaneers and the Saints. So it's not an awful group for rookie JJ McCarthy to be dropped into at some point, but this is clearly the worst team in the division. And I mean, the earlier they start the rookie, the worst it's going to be for 2024, even if you could argue that it will be better for the franchise long-term.
All right, well, let's switch it over to our next segment. We've got the fantasy corner, and who are you looking to target in this division?
I'm going to go with Jameson Williams, who's currently going wide receiver 48 on Underdog. So you look at it, Josh Reynolds out the door. That leaves 474 routes available, and Jameson has the draft capital. Now he has the role. And the Lions not bringing anyone else into this receiving room signals to me that they have the confidence in the former first-round pick to make a leap and become this team's third pass catcher.
Yeah, and to add to your point, Dan Campbell says that Jameson Williams has been the most improved player during the offseason program. I mean, he was quoted saying, he's a man on a mission, and I'm just going to leave it at that.
Yeah, and the Lions are projected to score the second most points in the NFL between the 49ers and Chiefs. And you look at it, the 49ers' third receiver is George Kittle going 65th. The Chiefs' third receiver, Rashee Rice, is going 62nd despite the possible suspension. And Jameson Williams is going 86th. So I think his ADP is going to finish in the 70s after his role becomes clear in training camp. And Williams also has huge upside if Amon-Ra misses any time, because Williams is really the only other player with explosiveness in this Lions receiving core.
Yeah, I love that pick. A little third-year breakout possibly, but we've got one more segment for you guys, and that is a bet for the people. Tan, what do you have for us?
All right, so I'm going to set this bet up by talking about the talent on the Packers defense, because it's pretty absurd if you look at it on paper. They could start 7 first-round picks and 3 second-round picks this year. And there's a chance
Great.
that all this talent has just been held back by coaching these past few seasons. And I could see Jeff Hafley's single high looks being successful in the regular season, like we saw from Jim Schwartz last year or Dan Quinn in Dallas. It wouldn't surprise me if everything clicks here for the Packers and this defense finishes top 5. And they certainly have a higher ceiling than most of the teams in their range, starting around a league average defense in market. So I want to leverage the high ceiling that this Packers defense has by looking at the defensive player of the year market, specifically Rashawn Gary at 33-1. So you remember back in 2021, Rashawn Gary had 81 pressures. That was second in the NFL. Then he tore his ACL in 2022, came back last season. He was solid, 9th in pass rushing efficiency in his first year back. But now, 2 years removed off of the ACL, he should be firing on all cylinders.
Yeah, I love that pick. We know the ACL sometimes takes 2 years to really pop off, but I think that will do it for this week's episode. We will be back next Friday to preview the AFC North, and don't forget to check out drbobsports.com. We've got our NFL and college football packages, as well as our weekly free analysis. So, as always, thanks for watching, and make sure to like and subscribe.